When I was looking for the only keepsake I had left of my late wife, a 14-karat gold necklace bought at Tiffany & Co. for our 25th anniversary, my own flesh and blood walked into the room, cold as ice, and announced, "I sold it, Dad. I needed the money to upgrade to business class for our Bahamas cruise." Shocked by her betrayal, I immediately called Liberty Pawn Shop, desperate to buy it back, but the owner said something that made my heart physically stop. "Mr. Miller, you need to get down here right now." When we opened the hidden clasp on the pendant, it wasn't just your wife's picture inside. This secret would completely shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are right now. The drive to Liberty Road felt like steering through a ghost town. The New Jersey winter was brutal, painting the suburban sprawl in shades of dead white and asphalt gray. But inside my chest, the cold was different. It was the kind of cold that gives you an eerie, unwavering focus. I drove in absolute silence, my eyes fixed on the icy road, ignoring the text messages vibrating my phone into a frenzy. Tiffany and Brad were already arguing about who would pay for the cruise excursions. They had no idea where I was going. The truck pulled up to a weathered, brick storefront with heavy steel bars over the windows. A neon sign flickers weakly in the midday gloom. Liberty Pawn and Gold. I stepped out of the truck, wrapping my heavy wool coat tighter around myself, and pushes open the door, triggering a faint brass chime. The shop smelled exactly like old secrets, a heavy mix of worn leather, tarnished brass, and metal polish. Glass cases lined the walls, filled with the desperate history of people who had run out of choices. Vintage guitars, high-end tools, and engagement rings that had lost their promises. Behind the counter stood Harold. He was a man in his late 50s, with neatly trimmed gray hair, sharp eyes, and gold-rimmed reading glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up as I walked in, his eyes instantly dropping to my hands, then matching my face. "Mr. Miller?" Harold asked, his voice low and surprisingly gentle. "I'm Arthur," I said, placing my palms flat against the cold glass of the counter. "My daughter came in here yesterday. She sold you a gold necklace. A heart locket, 14 karat, bought at Tiffany's." Harold let out a heavy sigh, nodding slowly. He didn't look like a vulture trying to profit off my tragedy. He looked like a man who had seen too many family betrayals in this neighborhood. "I remember her, Arthur, early 40s, frantic, wouldn't look me in the eye. Kept checking her phone. I gave her 800 because that's the raw weight value, but I knew the piece was worth far more. Hold on." He went into the back room and returned carrying a small bundle wrapped in a black velvet cloth. He carefully unfolded it on the glass counter. The gold necklace caught the harsh fluorescent overhead lighting, its polished surface gleaming like a beacon. Seeing Mary's necklace lying on a pawn shop counter felt like a physical blow to my ribs. It looked exactly as it did every morning for 40 years, resting against her collarbone as she made breakfast. "The standard buyback with interest is $1,500, Arthur," Harold said, his tone apologetic. "I have to run a business, but I won't charge you a dime more." I didn't argue. I pulled out my wallet and counted out 15 crisp $100 bills, money I had saved from my monthly Social Security allocation. Harold took the cash, slid the paperwork across, and then paused, his expression turning intensely serious. "Arthur, there's something you need to see," Harold muttered, leaning in closer. "When I was cataloging the piece last night, I noticed the weight distribution was off, just by a fraction of a gram. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've seen custom lockets, but this one, it doesn't open the normal way." Harold was right. Tiffany had just seen raw gold, but my eyes saw the mechanics. Mary knew I was an engineer. She knew how my brain worked. I turned the pendant over in the palm of my hand. There, hidden beneath the filigree pattern near the top loop, was a microscopic indentation, a spring-loaded mechanical latch. I pressed my thumbnail firmly into the groove and slid the outer casing upward. Click. The heart locket didn't just open. A secondary, hidden compartment inside the base swung open like a miniature vault. Inside, rolled tighter than a needle, was a tiny sliver of heavy parchment paper. I used a pair of precision tweezers provided by Harold to gently extract the paper. I unrolled it against the dark velvet cloth. My breath caught in my throat. It was Mary's handwriting, unmistakable, measured, and sharp. My eyes strained to read the tiny script, and as the words registered, the room began to tilt. Artie, the note read, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and Tiffany has finally shown her true colors. Don't be blind anymore, my love. She is drowning in her own greed. Go to Chase Bank and Vanguard. Use the account numbers below. I secretly managed our investments and built a hidden 401k trust worth $150,000 entirely in your name. It is safe from her. Tiffany will try to push you into a cheap, state-run nursing home to legally seize the New Jersey house. Do not let her turn you into a victim. Take the money, Artie. Act first. Secure your freedom. Forever yours, Mary. Below her signature were 2 long strings of account routing codes. I stood frozen in the dim light of the pawn shop, the tiny piece of paper heavy as lead in my hand. $150,000. Mary had seen the rot in our daughter years before I ever did. She had built a fortress to protect me from beyond the grave. Harold looked at me, his eyes full of silent understanding. You all right, Chief? I carefully rolled the note back up, placed it securely inside my inner coat pocket next to my heart, and clasped the gold necklace around my neck, tucking it beneath my flannel shirt. I looked at Harold, and for the first time in 3 years, the sorrow on my face vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. I'm better than all right, Harold, I said, my voice dropping an octave, steady and absolute. The engineering phase is over. Now it's time for execution. The tires of my old Ford pickup crunched through the freezing slush as I pulled back into the driveway of my own home. For 42 years, this colonial house in New Jersey had been my sanctuary, but now it felt like walking back into enemy territory. I took a deep breath, feeling the solid weight of Mary's gold locket resting safely against my chest beneath my flannel shirt. Inside my jacket pocket, the tiny paper scroll with the Vanguard and Chase routing numbers felt like a loaded weapon. Mary had given me the blueprints to survive, and as a retired Boeing engineer, I knew exactly what to do next. A chaotic structure cannot hold. You have to isolate the structural failures before the entire building collapses. I pushed open the heavy oak front door, and the familiar wave of sensory assault hit me instantly. Brad was sprawled across the living room sofa, surrounded by empty pizza boxes and crushed soda cans, the television blaring another sports broadcast. He looked up, a lazy, arrogant smirk spreading across his face when his eyes caught the glint of gold at my collar. Well, look who's back, Brad chuckled, shaking his head as he checked his phone. Did you seriously go waste more money buying back that old chain, Artie? Tiffany told you we needed that cash for the Bahamas. You're being real selfish with our future, old man. From the kitchen, Tiffany emerged, holding her phone up to her face as she checked her Instagram engagement. She glanced at the necklace, her eyes narrowing into cold daggers, but she didn't say a word. She just sighed, a heavy, theatrical exhale designed to make me feel like a burden in my own kitchen, before turning away to text someone. The blatant disrespect didn't make my hands shake this time. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, mathematical clarity. I looked at Brad, then at Tiffany, and I realized I was done enduring. They were parasites, and I had spent 3 years letting them erode the foundation of my life out of a misplaced sense of guilt. No more. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, locked the door behind me with a soft, deliberate click, and sat down at my old wooden desk. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and a black pen. It was time to think like an engineer. Step 1. Identify the problem. The problem wasn't just that they were lazy and ungrateful. The problem was that they were actively plotting to strip away my autonomy and steal this house. Step 2. Gather data. I needed to know exactly how deep their manipulation went. I turned on my laptop and logged into my online Boolean account to check my delivery status for the upcoming month's property tax documents. That was when I hit the first anomaly. The system flagged my account, stating that a digital mail forwarding request had been processed 48 hours ago. My heart skipped a beat as I clicked on the details. Someone had filled out a fraudulent OOSP's change of address form online, redirecting all physical mail containing financial statements, bank notices, and legal documents away from my physical mailbox and forwarding digital scans straight to a private email address, bradmiller-bedding@gmail.com. My stomach turned. Brad hadn't just been stealing loose cash or selling jewelry. He had actively hijacked my identity within the postal account to intercept my financial data, ensuring I would never see any warning letters from banks or tax assessors. It was a calculated move to control my money and keep me completely in the dark while they executed their plan to declare me incompetent. I stared at the screen, my jaw clenching, as I carefully took a screenshot of the fraudulent forwarding page and saved it into an encrypted folder on my hard drive. This was the 10% change they hadn't factored into their equation. They thought I was just a clueless, grieving old man who didn't understand technology. They forgot that I spent 40 years designing complex flight systems where every single error is logged and analyzed. Brad had just handed me a federal mail fraud violation on a silver platter. I leaned back in my chair, tapping the pen against the legal pad, a grim smile finally touching my lips. Step 3. Develop a plan to isolate the failure. I wasn't going to confront them, yell, or demand they leave. That would only make them defensive and reckless. Instead, I was going to quietly build an unassailable fortress of evidence, map out their financial crimes, and cut off their resources one by one until the trap snapped shut. The engineering phase was officially complete. Now, it was time to build the cage. The opportunity I needed arrived the following Saturday. Tiffany had managed to secure an invitation to an exclusive country club charity gala in North Jersey, a desperate bid to mingle with local influencers and take photos for her social media. It took her hours to get ready, caking on makeup while loudly berating Brad to iron his only decent suit jacket, while Chloe whined about the lack of aesthetic lighting in her bedroom. The moment their car engine roared and their sleek, financed SUV finally pulled out of the driveway, the suffocating tension in the colonial house vanished, replaced by a beautiful, hollow silence. I didn't waste a single second. I walked down to my truck, retrieved a brown Amazon box I had hidden under the back seat, and brought it up to the kitchen. Inside were 3 Smart Nest smoke detectors. To anyone else, they were standard, white plastic fire safety fixtures. But to an engineer, they were perfect surveillance housing. Each one had been meticulously retrofitted with a high-definition, wide-angle pinhole camera lens, drawing independent power from an internal, long-lasting lithium battery matrix. Working with practiced efficiency, I took a stepladder and replaced the outdated smoke detector in the living room corner, angling the lens to capture the entire sofa, the television area, and the hallway entrance. I mounted the second one in the kitchen, directly above the refrigerator, and the third in the upstairs hallway facing my bedroom door. I synced the feeds to an encrypted app on my phone, testing the resolution. The picture was flawless, streaming directly to a secure cloud server that required biometric authentication. They wanted to turn my home into a stage for their entitlement. Now, every single move they made would be documented on my terms. But visual evidence was only half the equation. To truly crush their entitlement in a court of law, I needed to speak the only language the American legal system truly respects: hard, undeniable financial data. I sat down at my desk, opened a heavily encrypted cloud spreadsheet, and began building my forensic master file. For 3 years, I had quietly kept every single receipt, every utility statement, and every maintenance invoice, tossing them into an old metal filing cabinet out of habit. Now, that habit became their undoing. Line by line, cell by cell, I categorized the data with brutal precision. I logged the electric bills, which had skyrocketed by 200% the month Brad moved in with his massive gaming rig and constant air conditioning. I entered the water bills, bloated by Chloe's 40-minute luxury showers. I itemized the grocery receipts, thousands of dollars spent on high-end organic groceries that Tiffany demanded, only for me to find half of it rotting in the trash while they ordered DoorDash on credit cards. Alongside these towering numbers, I created a column labeled Tenant Contributions. For 36 consecutive months, Across rent, utilities, food, and emergency home repairs, the number in that column remained a flat, unwavering zero. I added a separate tab detailing the $18,500 in personal loans I had given to Brad for car troubles and failed business ventures, complete with the digital timestamps of my bank transfers. When the final formula calculated the grand total, the number at the bottom of the screen made my jaw tighten. They had drained over $75,000 of my life savings just by existing under my roof like parasites. I locked the spreadsheet, backed it up to 3 separate servers, and closed my laptop just as the distant headlights of their SUV cut through the New Jersey night. As I heard their loud, drunken voices echo through the front door, I reached beneath my shirt and touched Mary's gold locket. The trap was officially built, the cameras were rolling, and every single cent they stole from this moment on was being added to their bill. By Tuesday evening, the trap I had set began yielding its first harvest of dark truths. I sat locked inside my bedroom, the heavy deadbolt thrown, the curtains drawn tight against the cold New Jersey night. I pulled on my engineering-grade studio headphones, plugging them into my laptop, and opened the encrypted Nest surveillance app. The house downstairs was quiet, but on my screen, the high-definition feeds from the living room and kitchen were crystal clear. I dragged the playback timeline back to Monday afternoon, a time when I had been out running errands, leaving the house completely to them. I hit play, and the voices of my family filled my ears, so crisp and vivid it felt as though they were standing right beside my desk. On the screen, Brad was pacing the kitchen floor, a half-empty beer in his hand, while Tiffany sat at the counter, frantically scrolling through her phone, her face twisted with financial stress. "We don't have the cash for the Bahamas excursions. Tiff and Amex is threatening to freeze my card." Brad's voice buzzed through my headphones, sharp and angry. "We need to stop playing nice with the old man. This house is sitting on $500,000 in equity, and he's just hoarding it." Tiffany sighed, setting her phone down, her eyes completely devoid of the daughterly affection she occasionally faked. "I know," she muttered, "but he won't sign a home equity loan, Brad. He's a retired engineer. He reads every single line of paperwork I put in front of him. He's too sharp." That was when Brad stopped pacing, leaning over the counter with a predatory smile that made my stomach physically turn. "Then we take the decision out of his hands," Brad whispered, his voice dripping with malice. "My cousin knows a guy, a licensed psychologist down in Cherry Hill, who handles discreet family transitions for the right price. For a few $1,000s, this doctor will sign an official medical evaluation stating that Artie is suffering from severe advanced dementia. We stage a couple of incidents, make him look confused in front of the neighbors, and use that evaluation to file for emergency guardianship at the county courthouse. Once a judge grants us legal control over his estate, his citizenship and rights are effectively void. We sign the house over to our names, put him in that state-run facility on Route 4, and we can be on that cruise ship by next month with his bank accounts completely drained." Tiffany didn't gasp. She didn't hesitate. She just stared at her husband for a long, silent moment before a slow, calculated nod spread across her face. "A dementia diagnosis," she whispered, her voice chillingly practical. "The court would fast-track it. He wouldn't even be allowed to hire his own lawyer to fight it. Do it, Brad. Call your cousin tonight. We need that paperwork before the winter ends." I sat frozen at my desk, the audio echoing in my ears like a death sentence. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were actively plotting a psychological execution, planning to strip away my legal existence and lock me in a warehouse for the elderly just to fund a vacation and clear their credit card debt. My hands remained perfectly still on the desk, but inside, the last remaining shred of my paternal guilt evaporated into nothingness. They thought they were the predators, but they didn't realize they had just confessed to a massive conspiracy of elder exploitation on a federal cloud server. I maximized the video file, copied the raw footage onto 2 separate encrypted flash drives, and immediately drafted an urgent email to the finest elder law attorney in New Jersey. They wanted to declare a war of minds with a Boeing engineer, and they were about to find out exactly what happens when an architect of flight decides to build a crash landing. The next morning, before the winter sun could even break through the New Jersey frost, I was sitting in the prestigious downtown offices of Morrison and Associates. Patricia Morrison, a legendary figure in elder law, sat across from me behind a massive mahogany desk, her sharp, intelligent eyes hidden behind a pair of designer reading glasses. I didn't say much. I simply pushed my laptop forward and laid 2 encrypted flash drives onto her desk, alongside a neatly printed copy of my forensic Excel spreadsheet. For 20 minutes, the office was dead silent except for the rhythmic clicking of her mouse. I watched her expression shift from professional detachment to absolute icy fury as she watched the Nest video of Brad and Tiffany plotting my dementia diagnosis and reviewed the meticulously logged 3-year history of 0 financial contributions. Patricia took off her glasses, leaning back in her chair with a heavy exhale. "Arthur, this surveillance footage is a masterpiece of evidence, but your spreadsheet sparked an alarm in my system," she said, pulling up a secure real estate title and credit registry on her monitor. "When I cross-referenced your property address with active banking applications in New Jersey, I found something your cameras missed." She turned the monitor toward me, pointing to 2 flagged digital documents from Chase Bank, dated just 3 months ago. My heart dropped as I stared at the signature lines. There, written in an unpracticed, shaky imitation of my handwriting, was my name. "Your daughter Tiffany has already crossed the line from entitlement into severe criminal territory," Patricia stated, her voice dropping into a dangerously serious tone. "She has twice attempted to fraudulently secure a home equity line of credit, a HELOC loan, for $120,000 against your house. She forged your signature on the digital applications and tried to impersonate your primary estate authority." My jaw clenched so hard it ached. She hadn't just plotted to lock me away, she had already tried to steal the equity Mary and I had spent decades paying off. "The only reason these loans weren't approved," Patricia continued with a grim smile, "is because Chase Bank's fraud department flagged the applications when she failed to upload a high-resolution scan of your original, physical Boeing retirement ID card and driver's license. She didn't have your physical credentials, so the system locked her out." Patricia slammed the file shut, a look of fierce determination on her face. "Arthur, grand larceny, identity theft, and elder financial exploitation are felony offenses in the state of New Jersey. They thought they were playing a game of chess to take your house, but Tiffany just handed us a federal hammer. We are no longer just filing a standard civil eviction. I am drafting an emergency petition to the county court today. We are going to hit them with a legal shield so heavy they won't even see the impact coming. Go home, act completely normal, and let my process servers do their job." I stood up, shook her hand firmly, and felt Mary's locket rise and fall against my chest with a steady, peaceful rhythm. The trap was no longer just built, the concrete was being poured, and my family was about to walk right into it. The heavy hand of justice finally knocked on my front door on a bitter Thursday afternoon at exactly 2 o'clock. I sat quietly in the dining room, sipping my coffee, as Tiffany strutted to the foyer, loudly complaining about the interruption to her afternoon. She ripped the door open, expecting an Amazon delivery, but instead found a stern-faced, broad-shouldered man in a dark tactical jacket holding a thick manila envelope, a professional New Jersey court process server. Before she could utter a word, the man spoke with absolute legal authority, confirming her identity and thrusting the paperwork into her hands, announcing that she had just been formally served with an official eviction notice from the county court, alongside a mandatory lease agreement demanding $2,000 a month in market-rate rent if they wished to occupy the premises for the next 30 days. Tiffany's face drained of all color as her eyes scanned the court seals. She let out a piercing, hysterical shriek that brought Brad roaring out of the living room like an unchained animal. Seeing his wife holding the eviction papers, Brad's face turned a violent shade of crimson, his fists clenching as he blindly charged toward the front porch, screaming profanities and preparing to physically assault the process server to rip up the documents. But mid-stride, his boots locked up on the hardwood floor, and he froze completely dead in his tracks. He looked up toward the grand staircase, his aggressive sneer twisting into a look of sheer panic. There I stood on the landing, completely calm, holding my smartphone perfectly level with my eyes, I looked down at him and said, in a voice that echoed through the entire house, "Keep moving, Brad. I am currently live streaming this entire interaction directly to the New Jersey Town Watch and County Residents Facebook group. There are currently 400 of our neighbors watching you in real time, and the local police department has already been tagged in the broadcast." The process server, unbothered and thoroughly prepared for a hostile situation, calmly tapped his own body camera, gave a cold nod to the frozen, humiliated Brad, and walked back down the snowy driveway without a single word. Tiffany's hands shook so violently the papers crackled in the silence, her eyes darting between her paralyzed husband and the glowing screen of my phone. The neighborhood was watching. The veil of secrecy they had used to isolate and exploit me for 3 years had just been permanently shattered in front of the entire community. Brad slowly lowered his fists, his breathing heavy and ragged, realizing that his thuggish intimidation tactics had been rendered completely useless against an engineer who knew how to control the narrative. I looked at the comments rolling in on my screen, then looked back down at the parasites standing in my foyer and flipped the phone off, leaving them standing in the cold shadow of an unwinnable war. By Monday morning, the atmosphere inside the house had devolved into absolute madness. Desperate and furious after being served, the family resorted to low-level warfare, cutting off the house's fiber-optic internet line and secretly pocketing the keys to my Ford pickup truck in a pathetic attempt to trap and isolate me from my legal counsel. They thought they were blinding me, completely unaware that my engineering training had already anticipated their desperation. I walked into the kitchen to brew my morning tea, only to find Brad blocking the exit, his massive frame radiating pure malice, while Tiffany watched coldly from the hallway. Before I could even request him to step aside, Brad lunged forward, invading my personal space and slamming his heavy palms directly into my chest. The force of his shove sent me stumbling backward violently, my hip crashing hard against the sharp edge of the granite countertop as I struggled to maintain my balance. Brad leaned down, his eyes wide with a terrifying, unhinged intensity, and growled directly into my face. "You think you're smart with your little Facebook live streams, old man? A sudden slip and a fatal fall down these steep basement stairs happens very easily at your age. Keep pushing us, and nobody will ever find out what really happened to you." What Brad's thuggish, arrogant mind failed to realize was that I had already prepared for this exact scenario. He thought cutting the main router meant my security network was dead, but he didn't know that my retrofitted Nest smoke detectors were running on completely independent, heavy-duty lithium battery matrices. The moment the main Wi-Fi dropped, the camera above the refrigerator seamlessly switched over to an integrated, encrypted cellular backup data stream. The entire interaction, the physical assault, the chilling look of intent on his face, and his explicit, recorded death threat, was streamed in high-definition real-time directly to the secure cloud network. Within seconds of the impact, an automated emergency script I had written triggered a high-priority data upload straight to Patricia Morrison's law firm servers and the local precinct. I looked past Brad's smirking face at the tiny, invisible pinhole lens hidden in the white plastic grating on the ceiling, stood up perfectly straight, and adjusted my flannel shirt over Mary's locket. He thought he had just terrified an old man into submission, but, in reality, he had just uploaded his own arrest warrant to a federal server, leaving me entirely validated and ready to watch his entire world crumble. Less than 48 hours after Brad's hands made contact with my chest, the cold, administrative machinery of the New Jersey judicial system swung into motion with terrifying speed. Patricia Morrison didn't just file a standard motion. She marched the cellular backup footage directly into the county courthouse under an emergency petition for elder abuse and immediate domestic protection. The judge, a notoriously no-nonsense magistrate named Margaret Stone, fast-tracked the case, summoning both parties to an emergency hearing by Thursday morning. I sat at the plaintiff's table in a crisp suit, Mary's locket resting firmly against my collarbone, while Brad and Tiffany sat across the aisle, looking arrogant and completely unprepared for the ambush. Patricia stood at the podium, opened her laptop, and projected the high-definition cellular backup video onto the courtroom monitors. The entire room went dead silent as the footage played. The clear, unprovoked physical shove, the hard impact of my body against the granite counter, and Brad's chilling recorded voice promising a fatal accident down the basement stairs. Judge Stone's face turned into a mask of pure steel as the video ended, her sharp gaze locking onto Brad, who suddenly looked very small beneath his faded blazer. She didn't request a defense argument, nor did she grant their attorney room to speak. She slammed her gavel down with a resounding crack that echoed off the marble walls and immediately issued an emergency restraining order with unprecedented, draconian conditions. Mr. Miller, your actions on this tape cross the line from a civil dispute into criminal assault and explicit physical intimidation of a vulnerable senior, Judge Stone declared, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a razor. I am issuing a protection mandate effective this very second. You have until exactly 10 o'clock tonight to have your personal belongings packed and vacate the premises entirely, escorted by the county sheriff's department. Furthermore, should you ever enter any common space within that residence while your father-in-law is present, you are legally required to maintain a strict, minimum distance of 15 feet from him at all times under penalty of immediate arrest and felony contempt. Tiffany gasped, burying her face in her hands as Brad stared straight ahead, his jaw slack and his chest heaving in stunned, public humiliation. They had spent 3 years believing that my age made me an easy target, that they could isolate me and manufacture a false reality behind closed doors to steal my life's work. But as we walked out of the courtroom into the blinding winter sun, I looked back at them and felt a profound, unwavering peace. The law had officially built a wall around me, the police were on their way to purge my house of Brad's toxic presence, and the parasites were finally discovering that when you try to break a structural engineer, you only succeed in triggering your own demolition. With Brad legally banished from the house, the remaining structure of their entitlement began to splinter. But I knew a partial victory wouldn't stop them. To permanently uproot their greed, I had to eliminate the very prize they were fighting for, the colonial house itself. I contacted Robert Santos, a premier real estate agent known for handling high-stakes, hostile property liquidations with absolute discretion. He arrived the next morning, cutting through Tiffany's venomous glares as he meticulously photographed the rooms, mapped the square footage, and logged the house onto the market. By dusk, a massive, brilliant red and white "For Sale" sign stood firmly hammered into the snow-covered front lawn, a definitive declaration that their rent-free haven was nearing its end. The sight of that sign drove them to absolute desperation, pushing them to cross a legal boundary they couldn't undo. In the dead of night, under the cover of a freezing New Jersey blizzard, the outdoor security feed on my phone flashed an alert. I looked at the screen to see Tiffany out on the lawn, wrapped in her designer coat, frantically using a can of black spray paint to deface the "For Sale" sign with aggressive, chaotic strokes to scare away potential buyers. Standing right beside her was Chloe, holding a high-powered ring light on a tripod, tears streaming down her face as she recorded a highly stylized, deceptive TikTok video, sobbing to her followers about how her cold-blooded, mentally unstable boomer grandfather was violently throwing a vulnerable family out into the freezing winter streets. They thought this coordinated campaign of public shaming and vandalism would break my resolve and force me to take the house off the market. But an engineer doesn't fight chaos with anger. You fight it with documentation. I didn't open the window, I didn't scream, and I didn't give them the explosive confrontation they desperately needed for Chloe's social media algorithms. I simply watched the high-definition cellular feed, saved the footage to the cloud, downloaded the crystal-clear video files of Tiffany's face holding the spray can, and quietly forwarded the entire package directly to the county sheriff's department with a formal complaint for property vandalism, witness intimidation, and violation of the ongoing court proceedings. As the flashing blue lights of a patrol car slowly rolled down the quiet suburban street to process the crime scene, I reached under my collar and tapped Mary's gold locket. Tiffany and Chloe had just turned their desperate internet stunt into a verified criminal record, completely unaware that every chaotic move they made only accelerated the closing of their own cage. The day of reckoning arrived on July 2nd, under the sterile, unforgiving fluorescent lights of the county courthouse. I sat at the plaintiff's table with perfect posture, my fingers tracing the cold, familiar edges of Mary's gold locket beneath my tie, while Patricia Morrison stood beside me, surrounded by our thick, neatly indexed folders of evidence. Across the aisle, Tiffany sat rigid, her face heavily powdered to hide the stress, whispering frantically to her defense attorney, Robert Carlson. When Judge Stone took the bench, she bypassed all pleasantries, her sharp gray eyes scanning the court files with absolute authority before calling the eviction case of Miller versus Thompson to order. Carlson stood up immediately, adopting a deeply emotional tone as he attempted to sway the court, arguing that this was Tiffany's sacred childhood home, a place of deep sentimental value, and that an unwritten, binding verbal agreement had been established 3 years ago, allowing the family to reside there permanently to care for me. He painted a picture of a cold, ungrateful father breaking a sacred familial trust, trying to exploit his own daughter's loyalty just to turn a profit on the real estate market. Judge Stone, however, did not let him finish his theatrical speech. She raised her hand, cutting him off with a chillingly professional wave, and turned her attention directly to our submitted exhibits. Mr. Carlson, sentimental attachments do not supersede property deeds in a court of law, and any alleged verbal agreements are utterly obliterated by the mountain of criminal misconduct sitting on my desk, Judge Stone declared, her voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. She pulled up the forensic files, systematically listing the documented evidence, the high-definition cellular backup video of Brad's physical assault in the kitchen, the police reports from Tiffany's midnight spray paint vandalism, and, most damning of all, the certified fraud logs showing her 2 separate attempts to forge my signature for a $120,000 HELOC loan. Your client did not occupy this home to provide care, Mr. Carlson. She occupied it to commit identity theft, financial exploitation, and physical intimidation against a vulnerable senior, the judge stated, her gavel hovering over the block. With a resounding final crack, Judge Stone slammed the gavel down and signed the official absolute eviction order, stamping it with the heavy gold seal of the state of New Jersey. She looked directly at Tiffany, whose face instantly crumbled into a mask of pure terror. I am granting this eviction with a strict, non-negotiable 30-day ultimatum, Judge Stone announced, her tone cutting through the courtroom like stone. You have until exactly August 1st to remove every single piece of your property and vacate the premises entirely. If you choose to defy this order, if you remain on the property for even 1 second past the deadline, the county sheriff's office is legally authorized to execute immediate physical removal, seize your assets, and place you under arrest for criminal trespass. Tiffany broke into frantic, hysterical sobs, burying her face in her hands as Carlson quietly packed his briefcase, refusing to even look at her. I stood up, buttoned my suit jacket, and walked out into the corridor without casting a single glance backward, knowing that the structural calculations of my defense had worked flawlessly, and the eviction machinery was now ticking down to their final destruction. The 30-day ultimatum expired at precisely midnight on August 1st, but as the sun rose over our New Jersey neighborhood, the quiet defiance inside my house remained unbroken. Tiffany and Chloe had chosen to barricade themselves inside, betting that a father's guilt would make me halt the legal machinery at the final second. They lost that bet at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning when 2 white and blue county sheriff's cruisers pulled up to the curb, their emergency lights painting the snowy colonial facade in rhythmic slashes of red and blue. I stood out on the sidewalk, wrapped tightly in my wool coat with Mary's gold locket safely tucked beneath my flannel shirt, alongside the moving crew I had hired to clear out the structure. The deputy sheriffs didn't hesitate. When no one answered their heavy, authoritative knocks, they produced a tactical breaching tool, shattering the deadbolt with a loud, metallic crack that echoed down the quiet suburban street. Neighbors began opening their front doors, stepping onto their porches to witness the public humiliation of the family that had spent 3 years terrorizing an old man. Within minutes, the deputies emerged from the fractured doorway, firmly escorting a hysterical, unkempt Tiffany and a pale, trembling Chloe out onto the icy asphalt, their hands empty and their fake, upper-class arrogance completely destroyed. The moving crew worked with mechanical efficiency, systematically purging the house of their existence and dumping their belongings onto the front lawn in a chaotic, exposed heap. Mountainous piles of designer clothes, half-packed boxes, Brad's gaming monitors, and Chloe's expensive vanity mirrors sat completely ruined in the melting slush for the entire neighborhood to see. Just as the deputies finalized the trespass warnings, a massive yellow Penske moving truck rounded the corner, signaling the arrival of the young American couple who had bought the property. Seeing the new owners arrive to claim the house, the final illusion of Tiffany's entitlement shattered into nothingness. She broke away from the deputy, dropping to her knees in the snow at my feet, her mascara running down her face as she clawed at the hem of my coat, screaming for forgiveness and begging me not to leave them homeless. But a structural engineer does not negotiate with the ruins of a collapsed building. I looked down at her, my face as impassive as granite, reached into my jacket pocket, and let my fingers brush against the crisp edges of the certified bank check from the closing. $550,000, entirely mine, entirely clean. I didn't say a single word, nor did I grant her the satisfaction of an angry glance. I simply stepped over her trembling hands, walked right past the wreckage of their lives rotting on the front lawn, and climbed into the cabin of my Ford truck. As I turned the ignition key, leaving them standing in the cold shadow of the sheriff's cruisers, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time, shifted into drive, and steered my life forward into absolute, unassailable freedom. The stifling, bitter winters of New Jersey became nothing more than a fading memory as my truck finally crossed the state line into Naples, Florida. The morning sun here was warm and brilliant, flooding the landscape in a golden light that felt less like weather and more like a permanent slate wiped clean. I officially moved into a beautiful, secure second-floor apartment within a gated 55-plus active adult community, a sanctuary of quiet palm trees, manicured lawns, and neighbors who greeted each other with genuine smiles rather than transactional calculation. Within a week, I had fully transformed the spare bedroom into my personal woodshop, arranging my brand new power tools methodically along heavy pegboards and setting up a solid oak workbench that smelled beautifully of fresh timber. The rhythmic, sharp whine of my table saw and the gentle scratching of sandpaper against raw wood became the soundtrack to my new life, a deeply therapeutic routine that allowed me to create rather than constantly defend. In the afternoons, I began meeting a group of open-minded, retired engineers at the community clubhouse, spending hours trading stories over black drip coffee and engaging in intense, quiet matches of chess where the only strategy required was on the board. But the final, structural calculation of my freedom required one last piece of legal paperwork to ensure the foundation could never be shaken again. Sitting on the balcony of my new home, under the warm Florida breeze, I met with a local estate attorney to execute a comprehensive, ironclad revision of my last will and testament. I didn't leave a single penny of the $550,000 from the house sale, nor any of Mary's hidden $150,000 trust, to my biological family. Instead, every single cent was legally funneled into a permanent endowment split between the National Center on Elder Abuse and a local Naples community shelter for vulnerable seniors. On the final page of the document, right above my firm, unhesitating signature, I insisted on inserting a definitive, legally binding disinheritance clause written in plain, uncompromising English. To my daughter, Tiffany Miller Thompson, I leave absolutely nothing, as she has already received her full share of my estate through the heavy tax of my silent endurance during 3 years of parasitic exploitation. With the legal vault permanently sealed and locked against them, a profound, unwavering peace settled into the very marrow of my bones. I walked back into my sunlit workshop, where the air was thick with the clean, comforting scent of fresh cedar sawdust, and the warm afternoon light streamed through the wide windows. There, mounted inside a custom-built, hand-carved oak shadow box on the center wall, hung Mary's gold locket. The polished 14-karat gold caught the brilliant Florida sunshine, throwing tiny, dancing reflections across the smooth wooden workbench like stars marking the end of a long, treacherous voyage. I ran a calloused finger over the perfect joints of the shadow box, adjusted the flannel shirt over my shoulders, and allowed a genuine, peaceful smile to finally touch my face. The war was over, the parasites were gone, and as the sun began its slow, majestic descent over the Gulf, I knew I was finally, absolutely free.